First thing I wanted to talk about, and I chose this picture as a way to uh, sort of capture the essential challenge I think we face, and it's a sensation we've all experienced in the grocery store, staring at a wall of toothpaste in this case, and it's sort of a bewildering set of options to choose from, and we end up grabbing. I don't know about you, but I end up grabbing whatever's cheapest or on sale. And I think that perfectly captures the challenge we're all trying to overcome as marketers, which is to stand out in this sort of sea of sameness, and hopefully leverage inbound journalism as a methodology to do that, to stand out, but also to drive a more thoughtful and meaningful buying decision, which doesn't happen often enough in the marketplace today as things get commoditized. And it's not just consumer products like toothpaste or even technology products like cell phones or tablets. It's all the business-to-business categories too. So you can think about the number of software and security players that are out there, cloud and service providers of all different types. And it's gotten so difficult to keep track of all these companies and how they're different and to get any of them to stand out that there's actually a company called Luma now that exists that creates these what they call Lumascapes, or sort of landscape diagrams of different markets for all sorts of industries. This one here is for mobile marketing platforms, and it really sort of captures the insanity of the way we operate as marketers today. That it's so crowded and so busy. How do you possibly stand out in such a market? And for the purposes of today's topic, how do we leverage a big idea to actually do that, to stand out from the competition? So the first thing we want to understand is, why is this happening in the first place? What is it that's causing this sort of to be overrun with so many different buying options in the market? And the answer is because most companies are trying to differentiate themselves down in the weeds of the details. It all starts with product managers who know their market better than anybody else. We all know our markets perfectly. And when you look at the world from the eyes of a product manager, you know the details of all your competitive offerings and how you're different. And then we go out and we'll create a Lumascape like we saw in that previous slide, or a Gartner Magic Quadrant, to show how we're different. But the problem is, it just breeds this groupthink mentality, where more and more features and capabilities are added, more and more messages are pumped into the marketplace in sort of a desperate bid to be different. And so back to our toothpaste example at the beginning, it's not just toothpaste now. It's, we're toothpaste plus breath freshener, or we're toothpaste plus breath freshener plus teeth whitener, and it just goes on and on. Adding capabilities, adding functions, adding more messages to it. And to the buyer, it just becomes a blur of similarity. The whole concept of differentiation ceases to have any meaning. And pricing becomes sort of this default decision point, and markets ultimately become commoditized. So this is where the big idea comes in. When everyone else is down in the weeds, and that's how they're differentiating themselves, it's time to climb higher and actually have a big idea that will separate you from everybody else in the market. So just to clarify, what do we mean by a big idea in the first place? It's not about your products and services. It's going to be bigger than that. It's going to be what they are in service of, how they're going to make people's lives better, as Keith mentioned before, how it's going to connect to the cares and concerns of your buyer persona. It's got to be authentic, and it's got to explain to them, why am I going to align myself with you for your product or service as opposed to somebody else. So one of the frameworks we use to develop a big idea, to help companies think about their big idea, is something called the Golden Circle, which Simon Sinek coined the phrase in his book and his TED Talk, Start With Why. And it basically describes the levels of messaging that any brand has in the marketplace. The outermost one is the what you do. Most companies are very good at articulating what they do. The next one in is how you do it. And most companies also know how to articulate the how. It's the unique differentiators, the ways you do what you do different than everybody else. And many of them stop there, and they never go to the most important layer, which is why you do it. And the why is not just to make money. It's what it's in service of. What are the products and services, the things that you do day in and day out? How do they make people's lives better? Why should anybody care? So he he uses Apple as an example because everybody pretty much gets it today. Apple's why was not to make a better computer. Right? That was their what. Their why was not to use design to make a better computing or a better computer. That was their how. What drove Steve Jobs when he founded the company was to challenge your very expectations and your notions of what utilizing and interacting with technology would be like. To challenge that status quo, to think different. That was their motto. And that gave him tremendous strategic flexibility later as he evolved the company. Because by standing for something like thinking different and challenge your notion of what technology would be like, he could now sell you a music player and change the way we consume music today. And it would be authentic and it would make sense and you wouldn't think twice about buying it from them. Whereas when Microsoft came out with its Zune or Dell came out with its music player, nobody bought it because it wasn't authentic. They were a hardware computer company or they were seen as an operating system company. Didn't fit into their framework, didn't seem legitimate. Whereas with Apple, it very much did. And the same thing held true for the iPhone, and it'll hold true for the iPad and the watch and anything else that Apple eventually sells us all, cars, refrigerators, whatever. The other reason this is really powerful beyond the strategic flexibility it gave them as a brand, as a company, is that it maps to the way people actually make decisions. Your big idea drives the buying decision. The interior of our brain, the oldest part of the human brain, that limbic and reptilian part, kind of maps to the why and where we make decisions. And it's based on gut level instinct. That part of our brain has no capacity for processing features, benefits, language, price rationalization. It's none of that stuff. It's your five senses and it's gut level instinct. The more modern part of our brain, the neocortex, is where all of that feature price rationalization, feature benefit analysis, that's where all that takes place. And that corresponds to the what and the how. And the challenge becomes if you as a brand in your inbound journalism campaign, in your selling, you're presenting yourself to potential new hires, if you don't have a strong, big idea, a why, something that connects at an emotional level, the buyer's going to default to some other emotional decision point. Usually they trusted the salesperson better. And then they'll justify it with the more the how and the what, and the price rationalization and all these other things. The big idea ultimately drives the buying decision, which is one of the reasons it's so important to have as the foundation of your inbound journalism campaign. So where do you find this big idea? There are the big idea, because it's not about your product or service. Generally, it's above that. Is going to be lodged in bigger, broader, universal human values. Jim Stengel, who was the global marketing officer at Procter & Gamble for a period of 10 years, studied this extensively when he was at P&G. They actually published a report now called the Stengel 50, which is the top 50 stocks that have really strong brand ideals and it's integrated into their culture. Those companies outperform the S&P by 400%. Those companies all have their brands lodged in one of these kind of universal human values. It could be about eliciting joy. Zappos is all about delivering happiness, even though they're a shoe company or a shoe retailer. Starbucks is all about enabling connection. Starbucks is never about a cup of coffee. It was about creating that third place. It was not home and it wasn't the office. It was that third place where you'd go and you'd hang and you'd connect with people. And yes, you'd have a cup of coffee or food or music, but it was about creating that sense of connection. And even IBM today, to take a technology company, its motto is always think, how it applied thinking to solve some business problems. Today, that's all about impacting society. How do we make a smarter planet? So one of the key things when you are looking or thinking about your big ideas, how does your business fit into universal human values like these kinds of values here? Another thing to remember is that your big idea isn't just about you. It's got to be about your audience. And every great brand is a reflection of its audience. So if you take Apple and Microsoft as an example, just to stay with that theme, these are two brands that have such passionate followings that people will sometimes tattoo themselves with their logos. Now, if you think about it, they come from very, very different origin stories and very different big ideas behind the two brands. Apple, with its Think Different motto, Steve Jobs was really about tapping into a rebellion, challenging the status quo, and to some degree being elitist. Only the crazy ones would buy an Apple product back in the day. Microsoft, on the other hand, Bill Gates' motto was a computer on every desktop. And it doesn't get any more democratic and sort of everyman than that. So two totally different visions. It's not that one is right or one is wrong. It's very much a reflection of how their buyers see themselves. And people who don't consider themselves elitist, probably more likely to buy a Microsoft product. Those who maybe felt they were more edgy, more creative, more elitist, different than everybody else, would have been attracted to an Apple product. Now, those brand ideals are starting to change a little bit over time because Apple has gotten so big, and that's one of its challenges. How does it continue to reinvent itself and stay relevant? But it really does show you how your brand, your big idea, has to be a reflection of the audience as much as it is a reflection of you and your product. Another thing that's critically important is to think of your big idea as a story. We are genetically wired for storytelling. We've been telling stories since before we had any technology other than fire, and we'd sit around the campfire and tell each other stories as cavemen. And it's scientifically proven that humans remember, connect, and recall stories more so than facts. And that is, if you can get your audience to remember a story about you and share it, that's the kind of word of mouth loyalty that drives evangelism. It's the thing all marketers seek. And so, to give you an idea of how powerful this can be, we can take a look at a story that's very relevant in our world today. In this example of sort of a small group of very powerful interests aligning to rig a system and perpetuate their power at the expense of everybody else. That's a narrative that everybody can connect with. Everybody's heard it. And it connected so much that it drove two very powerful sets of movements, whether it was Bernie Sanders' campaign or Occupy Wall Street, see Wall Street as the bad guys, or it was Trump's campaign and the Tea Party market seeing Washington as the bad guys. Same basic narrative coming at it from two very different directions. But it shows you how powerful the notion of a story can be. One of the most important things you can do with your big idea is to put it in writing. Not enough companies put this in writing in a way that is accessible to all their audiences. But when you do that, you have tremendous power to align and inspire people, both customers as well as employees and partners. And that's really what we're after here with an inbound journalism campaign, is to connect with people and to inspire them. So as an example, I like to refer to the Declaration of Independence. People in this country will argue about all sorts of things, as we know, including the intent of the framers in the Constitution. But virtually every American will look at the Declaration of Independence and will point to it and say, yeah, we agree with what's in there. And while most businesses have articles of incorporation, partnership agreements, the most important elements of their big idea, of their brand, the sort of undeniable truth that everyone in the company can agree on, and which truly represents them, they're rarely captured in one place. So putting that down in writing allows everybody to agree on what it is, to live it and celebrate it, and most importantly, then begin to infuse it into things like your marketing campaign. The last thing you really need to do with your big idea is you need to live it. In order for it to be authentic, it can't just be something that you put into writing. It has to be developed in a process where everybody gets to participate, and where it's inextricably linked to your culture and your people. They have to shape it. They have to deliver on it every day. As management and as marketing people, we can communicate what we think the big idea is, but if it's not backed up in things like rewards and recognition programs, in hiring practices, the way you review your people, and how management communicates internally, they won't deliver an experience that's in alignment with that big idea, and it won't be authentic. So that's a little bit about the power of the big idea. Hopefully that gives you an idea of how it can be applied in this kind of a campaign to provide a stronger, to make inbound journalism stronger, provide a more memorable connection with your audience, to help you stand apart from the competition, and ultimately to drive a better buying decision. And so with that, I thank everybody for inviting me on here, and I'll turn it back to Keith.
Thank you, JP. That was fantastic.